some of their trainers did a pre-conference training on Thursday here. They have generously provided lunch for us, and now they're going to share some of their collective wisdom with us and their knowledge of all the things that they've been doing. They just celebrated 100 years as peace builders. They are based in Philadelphia, and they are a Quaker-based organization, Quaker values-based organization. If you are unfamiliar with them, I'm sure you're going to learn a lot this afternoon, and we can always help connect you with them and information about them later on. I think you're tabling as well in the castle. So we're really excited that they have put together this panel and come and gotten us lunch today. So I'm going to hand it over to Mary Ann. Yeah, thank you. And take it from here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How's your lunch? Good. Good. It's good to see a full room on such a beautiful day when the sun is shining, and I know you're probably all tempted to be outside, so thank you for taking the time to be a part of this discussion with us. I also want to thank the sponsors of the program for giving us the space and the opportunity to be able to talk. So my name is Marianne Elias. I'm the Director of Program Administration for International Programs for the AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, based out of Philadelphia, but I work very closely with our international programs. So you might hear me asking some questions to the panelists, gearing their conversation a little towards perhaps how does this connect with international settings. We really want to make sure that we provide space for you to be able to have a conversation with us, so there should be Q&A back and forth. We're going to provide a lot of space for that as well. First of all, let me just get a sense of, you've now had, what, a day and a half of sessions, and when I looked at the agenda, it looked like it was very much academic focused with some activism focus and a little bit of practicum focus. How many of you came out of some very head-heavy sessions discussing theory and approaches and debating different ways towards peace building and justice? Raise your hand or cheer or clap if you had some head-heavy sessions this morning. Yeah. So our goal is to try to take you and shift you into a different direction of the conversation. We all, of course, very much appreciate those head-heavy conversations, but recognize that understanding and seeing examples of the practice of peace building is always helpful and useful in our work that we do. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about AFSC, since we actually have our panelists are from AFSC. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist was not able to join us today, so it did end up being just the AFSC group. By the way, this is not the name of the session, but I will tell you about this in a few minutes. So AFSC, as you heard, is a Quaker organization. We received the Nobel Peace Prize for our work. We accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of Quakers in Europe and the United States for our work in Nazi Germany. We firmly believe that as an organization that the Quaker values and faith in action is the way we should be doing our work. And so what does that mean? Domestically and internationally, our work includes peace building, humanitarian relief, and recovery. And of course, that comes in a lot of different forms in all of the different contexts in which we work. Big part of what we've also been successful at doing is quiet diplomacy. Perhaps you may know the Quakers for, especially AFSC, and Bill Sutherland for the work in bringing down apartheid in South Africa. A lot of that was done through quiet diplomacy. And then, of course, especially here in the United States, I think we see a lot of this, is the support for nonviolent movement and advocacy. And what brings us to this room today is to talk about nonviolent movements at the community level. And that's what we're here to talk about. We can't do the quiet diplomacy and the advocacy work if we don't have that connection to the community. It's really important that we're grounded in that work and that we have the access to the communities. I don't know if any of you were here for Joyce's presentation, the keynote speech. Joyce Ajluni is the General Secretary for AFSC, and she sort of in passing said, you know, when I was traveling to the offices internationally, I was really impressed with how all of our staff are local. The majority of our staff are local and from the regions and the countries where we work. This is a very sort of common thing that we're hearing now, especially in development, local first, local first. But AFSC has been doing this for decades. And to my understanding, to the extent that we said, as an organization, it started out as a service committee. So it was volunteers, Quaker volunteers. My understanding was, this was long before I started AFSC, was that those volunteers were predominantly white, privileged Quakers with the intention of doing good around the world. And they recognized that in order to be able to connect with the communities where the work was needed, it was important to be able to have members of those communities be a part of the work, and shifted the structure of AFSC to a staffing structure where we make a deliberate effort to include the communities that we serve in our offices. And so it is really quite remarkable when you travel around the United States. I always say that our staff in the United States are the communities where we work. And so that means that our work is well informed. And that informed knowledge helps us then be able to advocate for nonviolent policy change. So that is what I wanted to sort of lift up and share about AFSC. Of course, my computer just died. Okay. So we do have a fantastic, I think they're fantastic, group of panelists. And each of them is coming to you with a very different experience and a very different audience that they work with, also including different approaches. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Nia. Nia and I work in the Philadelphia office, and she works a lot with our youth programs. And today she'll be talking about the work around the youth network convenings. Nia is a phenomenal trainer and facilitator. She has this ability to be able to shift the energy in the room in a lively way. When I first saw Nia present, I thought, is she going to talk to us like we're youth? But she was really able to adjust to her audience and bring out such a pleasant and agreeable dynamic in the room. And I'm really hoping that with her artistic ability, her ability to move and sing and use words, that she'll be able to transform this room for us today. So with that, Nia, if you don't mind, I would like to pass the mic to you. Everybody welcome Nia, please.
Hello? We're going to try that one more time. Hello? All right, because I think we're all here because we care about doing this work to bring about peace and social change. Is that true? All right, so it's okay. I like to hear voices. So how y'all doing? Okay, because we're real people. So I am Nia Eubanks-Dixon. I'm the Youth Director for U.S. and International Programs at AFSC. And basically what that means is I get to work with all the youth programs across the organization. There are 28 youth programs that are considered youth programs of AFSC. And so what that means is these programs are working with young people directly. Some of them do it 100% of the time, and some of them do it maybe 40 or 30%, but they are actively dedicated to working with young people. And so a part of my job is not only to work with these programs, support these programs, hear what the programs need, hear what some of their struggles are, what their strengths are, but it's also about convening them and looking at how do we come together? How do we share best practices? How do we learn from each other? How do we support each other? And one of the things that I found is that we really have to do a better job of taking care of the people who are on the front lines of change. So it's not only about getting best practices and learning from each other, but how do we support one another? How do we make sure that we are providing self-care and that we're really taking care of us so that we can go out and be the change makers that we want to see and be in this world. So the network, we meet once a month. And it's wonderful because the network is made up of youth leaders who are dedicated to doing this work and not doing it for youth and not doing it to youth, but doing it what? With youth. And a lot of people say that, but it's very different when you're doing work with somebody. And so what does that mean when you're working with young people in community? It means that they have a voice. They're able to bring a sense of agency to talk about what matters to them, why it matters to them, how it matters to them. And then staff come alongside with them, helping to guide them in that process. So one of the ways that AFSC is doing work with young people, right, on major issues that are impacting them, like racism, like poverty, like immigration, like peace building, is we have formed out of the consensus of the staff that they felt that it was necessary to bring about young people globally to work on building a strong network. And the name of that is called Youth in Action. And so Youth in Action is a transnational network that brings together youth leaders from around the world who are first want to come together with other youth and saying, yo, I want to know what's happening in Guatemala. I want to know what's happening in Somalia. I want to know what's happening in Seattle. And what happens when you bring these young people together? Now, it's not just about bringing young people together, because many times you'll hear people say, oh, we're going to have a great gathering, and we brought these young people together. And usually we notice that people talk to them, they talk for them, but they're not talking. Ooh, we getting it. So we're not talking with them. So what does that look like tangibly? So I'm going to go through something with you that kind of talks about what our core values are. Because when we're doing this work and talking about impacted communities and you're working with them, there's some key things that we have to be clear about first, and that we as staff need to be clear about before we enter into community with other people to do this work. Because we can get real excited about going in. And so AFSC, especially within our youth programs, we are not trying to fix anybody. They are whole human beings. And so we are there to work with them, to highlight their assets, and to be at the forefront of them deciding the change that they want to see in the world. So I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out, take a deep breath in, and take a deep breath out. I know you're eating, and I'm so sorry, but I am going to ask you on a count of 3 to stand. On a count of what? 3. Very good. Here, that's why I make sure you was living with me. So 1, 2, 3. Can you guys hear me? Because I need my hands. So I'm going to ask you just so we can get in our bodies just a little bit. So the first one is you're going to put your hands up like so, and we're going to say peace. Let's try it. 1, 2, 3. Peace.
Peace.
So, hold on. It's okay. So, repeat after me. Peace.
Peace.
One more time. Peace.
Peace.
So you're going to repeat after me. I love adults. Here we go. Peace.
Peace.
Right? So how do we have peace in our homes? How do we have peace in our lives? What does peace really look like? We have these conversations and these dialogues about it, and we get in our heads. But what does it mean to you when you hear the word? When you hear the word?
Peace.
The next one is, everybody put your hand on your heart. Put your right foot behind you. And I want you to say love. Love. Right? So I have the right to be loved. I have a right to love myself, and I have the right to love you. And I give it freely. So on the count of 3, everybody say love. Love. And the third one is you put your hand like so with your fingers crossed like this, and you're going to bring it to your forehead, and you're going to throw it out. You're going to say respect.
Respect.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Respect.
Now, some people think of respect as treat others of how you want to be treated. But in the network, in the youth network, one of the things we talk about is that it's not about treating yourself or treating others how you want to be treated, because I don't know how you want to be treated, right? I don't know how you treat yourself. To us, respect means to respect. That means take another look at me before you judge me, before you put a label like at risk or dehumanize, or what's another proper? Marginalized or illegal. We ask that you respect youth. We ask that you respect. Take another look, and as using the Quaker values, seeing the light within, seeing the light within yourself. So point to your hand, self, and turn to your neighbor and say, other.
Other.
Right? And that's okay. It's okay to see the light in you and to see the light in another person. So repeat after me. Peace.
Peace.
Love.
Love.
Respect.
Respect.
These are the 3 of the core values that we have in the AFSC Youth Network. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to think of 3 things that you bring into the space when you do this work. Because it's important that we are accountable, we are transparent about who we are and what we are bringing when we come into this space. Because youth need to know that we have done our homework on us first. So I want you to think of 3 things. When you have it, I'm going to ask you to reach up like this, and I want you to pull it down as you have it. So when you have your 3 things, reach up. Now that's really everybody. Like when you got it, you reach up and you pull it down. 3 things that you bring into the space. I'm going to ask you just to find a partner really quickly. Just somebody at your table, just turn to them really quickly. Somebody at your table. Good. When you got it, I'll know because people will be standing kind of close to their peoples. There, I see a peoples happening here. Peoples? Peoples? Are y'all peoples? That's your peoples. Okay, good. So, I didn't teach this to you, but I'm going to teach it now. When I say I go, you say I may. I go.
Amen.
I go.
Amen.
And that's how I'll get your attention. So I just want you to briefly share the 3 things, say your name, and 3 things that you bring into the space. Are we clear? So my only ask is that you resist the urge to do this. Lucy's my friend, she's going to help me. So I'm going to ask you to resist this urge. So, hi, I'm Nia, and I'm going to ask you to actively listen and say and really see the person. Yes? I go.
Amen. Amen.
So you're going to do that. One person's going to share. The other person's going to listen. The other person's going to share. You'll listen. When you're finished sharing, I'm going to ask you just to do a validation clap and then turn around. And the validation clap looks like this. Boom. You got it? Please go to your neighbor right now and try. 1, 2, 3, boom. I go. Ooh, I go. So when you're done speaking, that means I see you. Say, I see you. I hear you. I feel you. So when both people have come to a place where they feel like they've been heard, they've been seen, and they've been felt, you give a validation clap and give a boom, and so it's like, it's all good. I see you, I feel you, I hear you, and I have shared authentically what I am bringing into the space. Yes? You may begin. Turn to your neighbor.
What do you bring, Cha-Cha?
This is so not what some of them and they're engaged. They're totally engaged.
I listen to other people's stories that pertain to me. And maybe
Yeah, they're all engaged.
and I will bring boy, work and what it might create.
Let's get the boom. So I'm going to ask you to start to wrap up. If you've been somebody who's been doing all the talking, and if you've done it, you can have a seat. If you've done the validation clap, please sit down. Yes. So I'm going to ask you to come to a wrap. Don't forget to do the validation clap. Good. I go.
Amen.
I go.
Amen.
Wonderful. So thank you all for doing that. So one of the things that AFSC, like I said, that it's so important is when we're thinking about doing youth work and doing work, I just said it, doing work with youth, is that the first step for us as AFSC is to really be clear about who we are and what we're bringing into the space. And so a lot of the work that happens is really working with staff members on giving space for them to think about that. And sometimes that looks like being grounded in an analysis, right? So one of the things that happened at AFSC recently is all the youth staff came to Guatemala for a week-long training on anti-racism decolonizing framework so that collectively we could be grounded in a shared analysis and to really understand the ways that racism and colonialism shows up in the space. And not only how it shows up in the space out there, like, oh, I see it out there, right? But how does it show up within us? How are we impacted by it? So what does it mean to be a person of color, and how have we internalized that? And what does it mean to be a white person in the space, and how you have internalized that? And then how does that impact what is taught, what is not taught, what is shared, what is not shared, who it's shared with, and who it's not shared with? And for us to be really clear on that analysis. So when we started doing the Youth in Action, we knew that it was important, A, that we did work with young people. We knew that it was important for us as staff to know what we brought into the space. But then we also thought about some other things, and this really came out of the work that the youth network and staff were already doing. And so we really just had those conversations, as I was saying before, around best practices, what works, what do youth think about all of this? So the first thing that we looked at was healing, right? So if we're gonna bring young people together, that we needed to make sure that this is a space for healing, that this is a space for them to be grounded in learning and identifying their strong I am, for them to be able to look at some of the traumas that have happened to them and start to look at why it has happened and how they can begin to start that healing process. Another portion that we looked at was building community, right? So for example, something as simple as what you did now, right? To really focus first on yourself, to think about what you bring into the space, and then to be able to turn to your community member and to be able to have a transparent conversation with them about how we build community. The third one that happens in Youth in Action that's important is that what I just said, that we ground young people in a youth-led analysis, particularly on racism and colonialism. And then looking at how it shows up in their community in multi-different contexts. So the Youth Network, I didn't share this before, or Youth in Action is made up of young people from all over the world. So we have young people in Somalia, young people who are from Burundi and Kenya. They're all coming together. So to be clear about how that might show up differently depending upon where you are. And then finally, we're looking at what does youth organizing look like? And for young people to have the space to then be able to understand organizing and then implement what they know. So for example, one of the things that is happening is the young people from Youth in Action are creating a global campaign called #WeAreNotAtRisk. And what that came from was when we were looking at linguistic racism and the power of words with colonialism, how that is still playing out in today's society. In Guatemala, you'll hear the word thugs, and indio, which is a word for mean indigenous, right? So if you're trying to talk bad about someone, you would call them indio, which means you are poor and uneducated. In the media in the United States, when we talk about youth of color in the media, you'll hear words like thugs or criminals. And in nonprofits, you'll hear words like at risk, marginalized. And so these are all words that are racially coded that come from a deficit model. And young people after that training said, no, this is enough. So from that strong community, having space for healing, being grounded in an analysis, looking at what does it mean to be an organizer in your local community, but having global implications. The young people created a We Are Not At Risk campaign, where the day of action is coming up on November 14th on social media. Please go to afsc.org in a couple of weeks and you can get information about that campaign. And this is what happens, like I said, when you have staff who come together, who are grounded in the analysis, who understand that their core values, and then when youth come together, who are supported by staff, who come together with healing, who come together to build community, who are grounded in the analysis, who then have a really great understanding of organizing, and then have the space and the support to implement the thing that they see is necessary, both in a local context and a global context. Thank you.
I told you Nia would be able to energize the room. Thank you for that. Especially for me, what I really liked was how you said that they have their voices and that we speak with them. I really appreciated that a lot. So now we're going to shift a little bit the direction of the conversation. I'd like to introduce you all to Lucy Duncan, who's the Director of Friends Relations at American Friends Service Committee. And I've had the opportunity of being able to work with Lucy for a while now in a variety of different task groups, as well as being able to travel and work with our Middle East team in Palestine. So I'm hoping that today she'll talk about the vision for the community well-being for using bystander intervention tactics, and also hopefully talk about some of her personal experiences that she's had with the different communities that she's worked with.
Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, I'm Director of Friends Relations, which basically means that I'm a community organizer for the Quaker community, and sometimes I feel like I'm the Director of Ally Strategy. So I'm going to talk a lot about that today. I wanted to start with a poem. This is a poem that I wrote on the occasion of the first version of the Muslim ban, and a young man that was loosely affiliated with us or found us, was so outraged by it that he started a Facebook event, and he ended up with like 20 to 30,000 people coming to the march that he was proposing. He didn't have any experience organizing a march. So he reached out to us and he said, oh, will you help us? And so in a week, we organized the Sanctuary Everywhere March in Philadelphia that had thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and a big rally at the beginning. And in the middle of that march, we stopped and we made a sanctuary space for the Muslims that were with us so that they could do their prayers. And so this is a poem that I wrote on that occasion. And our Sanctuary Everywhere stream of work, it tries to bring together different issues in one place and think of them together, whether that's Black Lives Matter, working to end police brutality, or immigrants trying to fight back against the horrific oppression that they're experiencing now, to understand ourselves as elementally connected and those issues as elementally connected, and that we need to create sanctuary for one another. Will you harbor me? Will you keep me safe? Will you shelter me as the gales of injustice pelt me with abuse? Will you be for me a temple, holding me sacred, seeing that I hold God? When the police stop me at a traffic light, will you take the gun from their hands? When ICE agents come for me in the middle of the night, will you block the door? When they poison my water, will you offer me a clear stream? When they take my land, cutting the earth with a black snake, will you stand in the way? When they try to pull my hijab from my hair, will you stop their hand? When I am in prison, will you visit me and break down the doors? When they tell me who to love, will you make a home for my lover and me? When they build the wall, will you knock it down and build a bridge? We thousands gather in city streets, in town squares, in schools, in churches and temples. We grab each other's hands, create a web stronger than fear, reaching across borders and fences into each other's lives. The tsunami of white supremacy is here. The earthquake of hate is coming for us. Let us tie ourselves together in a supple net of resistance. Let us offer sanctuary everywhere. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that we think about ally work. And I think that it's really important to say that in the system of injustice or in the system of white supremacy, there are those that are most targeted and most impacted that should be guiding our work and should be leading the efforts that we have. It doesn't mean that that not everyone is impacted. We're all impacted by this system, but in very differential ways. And it's really important to put that sort of out there and to really center that and to decenter whiteness and decenter the voices of the people that are less impacted or historically placed in a position of a perpetrator. And so a lot of our strategies are built around that and on learning how to really accompany, how to really follow the lead of others, and how to have everything that we do be deeply informed, as Nia was talking, by the incredible deep analysis of the youth around the world that we work with, or the people in Palestine that we work with, or whomever it is that we're trying to support. And so one of those things is that we teach, and this is a training that was developed by the People's Response Team in Chicago, and our staff is really a big part of that, is this bystander intervention training. So, which has been is a really important thing in enacting injustice or creating a differential kind of space out in the community. And whether it's a Starbucks in Philadelphia or a restaurant in New York where somebody's yelling epithets at an immigrant person, it's really important to know how and have the courage and the practice and the skills to be able to stand in the way of that. And this bystander intervention training, for me, as I've trained more and more people, it has in it the seeds of a much more radical change, which is that if we walked around the streets, understanding that we were elementally community for one another, and that if somebody else in the community, whoever they were, was harmed, we had a responsibility to stand in the way of that and do something about that. You have a very different sense of what community well-being is. If we were really understanding of that, the need for police becomes much like it starts to disappear. The understanding that the government is going to protect us, which is obviously not in many cases, obviously not what they're doing. That's not really the role. But we would understand ourselves as community in a very different way and see ourselves in a different way. So I think it's a very powerful tool for changing the narrative, for changing how we think of ourselves when we walk on the streets, and for understanding ourselves as elementally connected. And that vision stays with me and sort of informs the work. The other thing that we've been thinking about is when I started my work, I talked to a lot of staff and a lot of Quakers. And what staff said is, we need the support of the Quaker community to get what we are doing done. We need people to stand up and stand with us. And what the staff said is we really, and what Quakers said is we really want to help you. And they didn't say we want to direct your work. They said, we want to stand with you and stand with what you're trying to do. And so one of the patterns that was happening in Quaker meetings is that there was often people who had powerful witnesses or things that they wanted to do something about, but they were usually individuals that were doing that on their own and not collectives, not pulling on the collective witness of Quakers. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is bring back the collective sense of witness, but really deeply informed by an ally strategy and an accompaniment strategy. And so we found this model that was based on Quaker Parker Palmer's work, his Circles of Trust, that Unitarians in Denver had adapted to teach groups of Quakers on how to have a spiritual practice where they would tell each other their stories, they would worship together, they would deeply ground themselves in the spirit and in practicing transformative justice spaces with one another. Because the things that we have in the world, if we want healing justice, we actually have to practice it and figure out what it feels like and practice it with one another. So to create really deep, vulnerable community spaces, but in order to accompany grassroots groups, sometimes AFSC, sometimes other groups that are led by the people most impacted and really listen to what they need and what they're asking for us to do. And so we've developed this model called Quaker Social Change Ministry, which we're asking many meetings to do. And this spring, we partnered with the Unitarian Service Committee and the Unitarian, the UUA, and Church World Service and Freedom for Immigrants to do something where we were trying to really scale up the number of allies that were supporting particularly immigrants. And we taught them anti-racist praxis, and we taught them really intentionally the skills of allyship to do congregational sanctuary, to do ICE accompaniment, and to do detention visitation. And we had 1,100 people sign up, and we have 58 groups that are working across the country to do this work. It was very, very powerful. And I want to end with a story from Palestine. I was there for the first time in May of 2014, right before Operation Protective Edge. I was in Gaza with our staff there, and it was a very, very powerful trip and very inspiring and very. It changed me completely to have people after that be people in Gaza being bombed and watching during the 51-day war as they were watching my Facebook feeds and these friends and whether they were still alive after the bombing the previous night. It really was very, very transformative. But one of the places that we went to was Susia, which is in the West Bank. It's a little herder community that was moved in the mid-'80s from their ancestral home, and they were moved to an encampment, and they live in tents, and their village has been demolished several times by the Israeli military. There's a settlement that's up on the hill. Their water that belongs to them gets piped past them up into the settlement, and they have petitioned to try and gain access to that water, but they have been denied. So we went and we visited with them. We sat in a tent. We drank tea with them. And then they walked us up the hill to the school that's up on the hill. And it's a UN school that was built in Area C. So it has a demolition order on it. And we sat in the room of the office of the principal. And I said, what is the most supportive thing that you experience? What's the kind of support that matters to you? And he said the ecumenical accompaniers who come and stay with us, and they walk the children to school, and sometimes they get beat up by settlers as well, and they experience they see with their own eyes what we see, and then they go and they tell the world. He said that's what's been the most meaningful support that we've experienced. And so in all of our work in talking with allies and giving people the skills and the tools to walk with our work, that's a vision that I hold of walking with people, being willing to face harm with them, and being willing to tell that story to people who you may have access to that they may not. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lucy. It's not without reason that we tagged our centennial Courageous Acts. It really does, I mean, even just if you're writing a book, whatever it might be, it does take a lot of courage to be able to be a part of the peace building and social justice movement. Thank you. And so now I'd like to introduce you to Chia-Chia, who is going to show us a little bit of a different example, a community where they have a very specific need. She'll be talking about immigration, detention and deportation, and possibly, hopefully, sharing some of the personal examples of the people that she's worked with, some of their personal stories. So if you don't mind, Chia-Chia, hand the mic over to you.
Hi, so my name is Chia-Chia Wang. I am the Organizing and Advocacy Director for the AFSC's Immigrant Rights Program based in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. And I oversee policy and advocacy work, meaning that from local, state, and to the federal level, changing policy that affect migrants' lives here who decide to resettle here in the United States and in New Jersey on a daily basis, and also to change the narrative and to really let the larger community know why people move here and how can we support them. So I do want to, start by showing Milka's story, amazing young person that we have been working with for the last 7 years.
My name is Milka Kwame. I'm from Jersey. One of the hardest moments was not having my father in my life, not having a father figure in my life, yeah. The day my dad got deported, I was asleep, but I could hear you know how you can hear something but you think it's in your dream but it's not really in your dream, right? I heard somebody bust down our door. I thought it was a part of my dream. And the next morning, when I woke up, I could see my aunt on the side of my bed. And I thought that was my mom, so I thought my dad was off work, so I would always go to his bedroom to wake him up and stuff. But he was not there. And I was looking for him. I was asking everybody, my neighbors and stuff, where he was. And no one knew where he was. So I just started crying. I felt like it was my fault. When my dad left me, I thought it was my fault that he left. I did something. I did something to him that would make him leave. Because when I was little, I was kind of a troublemaker. I used to do stuff to piss people off. So I felt because he left, I thought that it was me that did it. I don't know, I just felt that way the entire time. I used to get all Fs. I used to get a whole lot of Fs. I would never do my homework. I would never study for tests. Art was basically the only thing that could help me because I didn't like really talking to people about my dad. So I just drew how I felt. I used to draw people crying a lot, just bust out crying or bloody faces. And I used to draw dead people because I was pretty suicidal back then. Drawing sad people made me feel aware on how I was feeling in the inside, and and I told myself, hey Milka, you shouldn't be feeling like this. You have to, what can you do to make yourself feel better? The turning point for me was talking to my guidance counselor. She was actually the first guidance counselor that was actually nice to me, and she told me that, hey, you control what you become in life. It made me feel powerful, actually. That's actually affected my drawings, because now I draw powerful things, empowerment things. My entire life I always felt oh, it was my fault, it was my fault, it was my fault. But around 14-ish, I realized that it wasn't me that did it. It took a long time to actually tell myself, hey, this was not you. This was the government who did this, and you shouldn't blame yourself for it. I would tell my younger self that it wasn't your fault, so you shouldn't have felt that way about yourself. I tell myself you can do anything if you try. That's what I say.
Trying to fix something, but you can't fix what you can't.
So this is one of the many stories that we work with, or the many young people that we work with. And also adults, parents, single individuals, migrants who have moved to this country on their own or with their family. A lot of them cross the border, risk their lives, abandon everything they know at home. You know, some of them chose to come to New Jersey, and mainly because they may have family members already settled in New Jersey, and that, or for whatever reason, the U.S. government decided that there's detention bed space, I'm gonna send them there, and then from there our program have immigration attorneys who work to get them out of detention. So our program based in Newark, New Jersey is probably AFSC's largest domestic program, and that we have about 20 staff members, and 2/3 are legal service providers. So that's and why. AFSC is not traditionally a service provider. We work with affected community members, and we work overseas and within the United States. But providing services is not something that AFSC is used to. But our program grew over the years, especially rapidly the last 5 years. Why? Because there's a tremendous need. The lack in legal status is a big problem, right? That could make someone subject to detention deportation. Once somebody is detained, very likely the person will be deported. And with some legal representation, the person's likelihood to get out is bigger. So we also advocate for anyone who is facing immigration, I guess in detention, to have legal counsel. So right now, some of you may know that people who are incarcerated for immigration purposes have no right to legal counsel or affordable legal counsel. So on the local and the state level, we advocate for publicly funded, public defender style, legal representation for immigrants who are detained. So how many people are detained at any given time? Too many, yes, absolutely. So over 40, and then it may go up again this coming year. So in the last, I guess I would say since 2007, around that time, U.S. Congress has mandated certain number of people be detained, certain number for immigration purposes. So by allotting us funding for immigration detention in the appropriation bills, over the last 10 years the funding grew, and right now it's the highest ever. So I guess unsurprisingly with the administration, really trying to deport more people than before. So that's something that we need to educate ourselves about. Is that something that we want to spend money on, to really detain people, deport people, and then separating children from their parents. And once families are separated and parents deported, parents are likely to cannot come back for 10 years or more in many cases, and sometimes indefinitely. So there's a whole lot of education that needs to be done, and our staff, engage in community education and do presentations as much as we can to really just, reveal the complexity and the hardship that the current immigration system has imposed on people. Immigration system has not changed over the last 20 years, and because of that, and then because the law that was the last immigration reform was 20 years ago, and that didn't allow future flow of migration. That's how we get into the point that the undocumented population grew over the last 20 years. So, looking into the future, we have to, include those people who are affected by immigration policies, and you really understand the need for people to migrate. And then with that in mind, we can make better and more effective policies. So that's sort of the lesson that we are learning, and we are also, working with the U.S. government, local government as well, to really make better policies that would address those needs. So again, locally, we provide legal services to people who are in detention, immigration detention, people who are outside of detention who may qualify for special immigrant status. A lot of people don't qualify for anything because in order to come to the U.S., you must have some sort of immediate family members, or you have an employer who can sponsor you. So most migrants don't have those opportunities or those ties. How do they come? They come crossing the border, or they come on a tourist visa and overstay. So our job is also to dispel, those myths about, people shouldn't come illegally, and that, if they are illegal, they should go back to their country and wait in lines. There isn't a line for people to wait. So, so we must educate ourselves about those facts. Those are no longer myths; they are facts, and that to understand that there is a migration, a need for people to move. We learn from our international programs, and we learn from our immigrant communities why people move, where they come from, and then one day they may return. And at AFSC, we believe that we are the facilitators of that process, which I think personally is a very beautiful thing to do, and I'm very privileged to do that job. That we have to respect people's migration choices, and that will lead to for all of us to be in a better place, and we firmly believe that. Right now, a lot of people are stuck in this country, and that's why we're seeing a very large, undocumented population, because there's no way to go back. Once they go out, they cannot come back for a very, very, very long time. And that so recognizing and learning about the root causes of migration, and then work with the U.S. government to improve, and then to include those, need. And it's sort of a very key things that we do our work, and also to work with those people who are impacted, the migrant communities, the immigrants, children and families that, and to support them to tell their stories in public and through, sort of the new age media ways. And that, Milka came to our office when she was 7 years old, and now she's 18. And her father has been deported over 10 years now. And we probably will try to find a way to bring him back since that 10-year bar has passed. And that, when we first met her, she could not speak. I think she did not exaggerate. She actually downplayed her, the hardship that the suffering that she had inside. And that, AFSC staff were not psychologists, and it was not our job to do that kind of analysis or diagnosis. We wait, and we interact, we learn, and that, we brought them to Washington, D.C., and that, after 3 or 4 years, and we were able to get some children to speak about stories of family separation. And to this day, we still are not child psychologists, and that we have not changed our position, and that, it is, but, to really support them and provide opportunities or create opportunities for these unheard stories to be told. And that, you can find more stories in our website, whether it's the National Migration website or our Immigrant Rights Program website under the Newark location. We also try to make sure that local law enforcement agencies do not do immigration enforcement work. Because federal immigration agency cannot go possibly detect and arrest 11 million undocumented immigrants. They have to rely on local law enforcement and local government's help. So, so sort of one way to really support the migrant community is to provide that local sanctuary, like Lucy mentioned, sanctuary everywhere. That to recognize that, to have a safe community, everybody needs to feel safe, and everybody needs to have the right to basic needs, and that, so we locally will work for local government to adopt something called sanctuary policy or fair and welcoming policy that would really provide essential services to migrant immigrants regardless of their immigration status, and that they would not be engaged in any kind of immigration enforcement, and that while at the same time we work on the federal level for better immigration policy to pass. So we also work with another population called people with temporary protected status. So you probably have seen in the news that the new administration has terminated 7 out of the 10 TPS programs, and that's more than 300,000 people who have been in this country for more than 20 years. Most of them have been in this country for more than 20 years with this temporary status. So, when we went to Washington to educate our legislators about the need for permanent residency, a lot of times we heard why temporary status means temporary. Shouldn't they be leaving now? So what would be our answers? No. Because?
The conditions haven't changed where they're coming from.
The conditions have not changed. People are human beings. They have families. They started making friends, right? Creating communities. And that, those are, what we need as a human being and as, a part of the human society. So, the many people or elected officials have failed to see that. And then, or maybe they see it, just not politically, I guess, correct or popular to actually say it and recognize that. So we have been working with this population and the immigrant community to advocate for permanent residency so that they can stay, and that would be the more permanent solution for this fairly large migrant community. So and then we documented their stories. So I want to show. I do want to end and then leave time for question and answers, and then but I want to show a daughter of one of our TPS holders to just end my part of the presentation.
My name is Liani Teresina. I am from Newark, New Jersey. I'm a U.S. citizen, but my mom has TPS and she's from Honduras. My mom has had TPS since before I was born, and she's been here for almost 20 years now, and I've seen her work hard for so many years. And she relies a lot on TPS because in order for her to have a license, she needs the TPS, and she needs to drive to and from her job. And so I've been working really hard with her and in the TPS campaign because I've seen her work so hard for me every single day of my life because she is a single mom. And so I've been able to channel that fearlessness that she has and really work hard for something that's really important to us. She hasn't gone back to Honduras because she wants me to get an education. And so now that I am going to finally be going to college, it's kind of really bittersweet because it's exciting that I'm going to be going to college and pursuing education that none of my family members have been able to have. But we run the risk of her possibly not being able to witness that with me. And it's something that we've worked so hard for, and she's probably not going to be here for that. And so I really want to fight hard for her so she can stay. And, you know, I want to make all the time that she's been here worthwhile and make her proud, because I know that she's come here for the American dream, and I don't think it's fair that she has to leave and her dreams be crushed. But I'm going to work really hard for our American dreams to come true.
Okay, so you've seen different examples of how we are able to offer direct service to those people whose rights have been taken away from them, where we accompany communities, and where we also work to lift up leadership among the youth. What we thought was the session is actually going to go until 2:15. I think they've postponed the other sessions to give us a little bit more time because we started late. I know Nia has to run. So what I wanted to see was, rather than me starting off with questions, see if the audience has, if any of you have questions. Let's start specifically with questions for Nia before she leaves. So if any of you have any questions at this time for Nia, go ahead and raise your hand and somebody will come by with a mic. Okay, I'm going to start with Barbara over here because she's close to me.
Thank you so much for your good work in this world. You inspire me every day and keep me going. Have the youth put together any kind of an organizing manual of their best practices to share lessons learned across the world? Could we read about their shared knowledge?
So can I just repeat back what I heard? So have the youth of AFSC put together best practices? Global network. So there are best practices and ways that young people have shared, and there are many forums that takes place with AFSC. One is through a magazine publishing that we do called Quaker Action, where sometimes young people are featured and they'll talk about the work that is happening and some best practices that is there. There's also opportunities where young people share, but they do share in a local context, especially like if you look at the international community of AFSC, where we work with different partners. So it's not just centered around what AFSC produces, but it's also about what is produced within the community and how that information is then disseminated with the different local partners to share best practices with each other. So for example, when I was in Kenya for the Youth in Action campaign, there were 5 or 6 partners that were there, and they were sharing best practices with each other, and the young people were there sharing best practices with the partners so that they could learn from each other, so that it was an intergenerational process. So there are plenty of things and times for AFSC where we do that, but we also want to make sure that some of that knowledge is shared out in the local context. For Youth in Action, for our global campaign, in about 2 weeks, please go to afsc.org and you'll hear the stories and see what young people are asking for you to do in order to change the negative rhetoric around young people around the world.
Thanks, Nia. Before she leaves, one more question for Nia.
Hi, Nia. Thank you so much for what you shared. My name is Johanna Turner. I teach at Eastern Mennonite University, Center for Justice and Peace Building. Actually, in my 20s, had the opportunity to benefit from some of AFSC's training. I was a part of the African Initiative Youth Exchange from about 15 years ago. I think the first group.
Nyango, you was there with Nyango?
Nyango Reggie and Roxanne Lawson. And so I wanted to actually find out if that program is part of what led to the Youth in Action, kind of network. Thank you.
So yes, one of the things that I love about AFSC is that they have a great archive center, and that there have been people who've been there for a really long time. So in creating the Youth in Action network that we have now, we definitely talk to people like Migwe, we talked to Sister Nyango, and really learned what were some of the things that we need to consider when we're bringing youth together globally. And I think what what makes this one a little bit different, though, is that now we're talking about youth from all of the 4 continents in which we work. So like I said, there's people from Somalia and Burundi and Kenya and Indonesia and Guatemala and Haiti and Seattle and New Orleans. And so we are all coming together. And what was interesting is that one of the questions people had was, you know, well, it's going to be too different. Like, the context is so different. But once young people started sharing their stories and we were grounded in this analysis and began to ask questions like, what is racism? And really began to see how it showed up, brothers and sisters from Indonesia was like, wait, what? And then people in Kenya was like, wait, what? And then we was like, yo, this is impacting all of us. And then to take it a next step further is like, so what? Now what? And having young people. So definitely learning from our past, but then also being present enough to hear the voices of what young people are saying they want now, and then taking that as the impetus to move forward. And I'll tell Sister Anyanga, she's going to be real happy about that.
She still works for us.
She still works for us, yeah.
So, Nia, if you need to run off, we won't be insulted if you need to step away, because I know you have some other stuff that you have to do. But let me reach out and see if there are any other questions for the panelists at this time as well. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Stephen Zunis, University of San Francisco. My question involves what the best response is when ostensible allies have problems with the kind of witness that the American Friends Service Committee takes, and how best to respond. I'll just give two examples that you all are probably familiar with, but the audience may not. One involves Friends Academy, a Quaker prep school in Long Island, where the administration canceled a scheduled AFSC sponsored talk by Israeli conscience objectors because apparently they did not want to have their students hear negative Israeli voices who oppose the occupation. Another, not far from here, Friends Central School, they banned the students from giving proceeds from a fundraising concert to the American Friends Service Committee because of AFSC's support for boycotts and divestment from companies that support Israeli violations of international humanitarian law. And just a few months later, the head of school abruptly canceled a scheduled talk by a distinguished Quaker Peace Studies professor from Swarthmore because he was Palestinian. And then when students rose up in protest, fired the 2 teachers, both young queer women of color, who had invited them. The message I've been getting from Friends Council on Education to me and other friends is that quiet persuasion, let's not make a big deal about this, just, try to appeal to their conscience and whatever. And there are others who think it's really time for, letter writing, petitions, vigils, protests, that this is unacceptable, especially for Quaker institutions. And so, but this question is not specific about those instances, but kind of the broader question of how what happens when people who should be our allies, should be our support of our good works, are too scared or too ideologically driven to allow us to bring forward alternative perspectives.
Good question. So, I mean, you go right into the sort of heart of institutional racism with these questions because Friends Council of Education is in Friends Center. Friends Council of Education, there's co-workers of that institution that work 15 feet away from my desk, and when Saed was disinvited and the teachers were fired, I did have several conversations with them and said, this is about defining what Quakerism is, and that Quakerism is principled. And I think it's a lot, I think there's, if you really want to know, often, I mean, I apologize for doing this, but I'm going to just say it. Yeah. Like often it's about resources and where the money comes from, and that limits the voice, even among among our friends that should be able to speak in a principled voice. I mean, I'm being judgmental, but I really think that that was a moment, a critical moment of choice for them, because the Quaker schools, they are really sort of the certifying body that says, yes, you can call yourself a Quaker school. And so there was a real opportunity there, I think, that was missed, that was really important in terms of saying that. And this is not something that's only happening in terms of Quaker schools and Quaker colleges. It's happening all over the Quaker world, where mimicking the sort of larger trends of society, where we need to be looking at white supremacy in our own institutions, including AFSC. We need to be looking at how that's showing up, how cultural white supremacy is playing out in those institutions, and we need to look at who we say we are, who we say we be, and how our practices line up. And we need to be, at this juncture, it's my belief that we need to take decolonization really seriously. We need to take anti-racist praxis very, very seriously, and we need to use this moment as an opportunity to transform those institutions to be more of who we say they are. And AFSC is closer than some, but we got some ways to go. So.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to your other question, which was, how do you know how to balance it? When do we pull out the activist's card and really start doing the petitioning, the marches, the open discussions, and when do we also have the quiet diplomacy conversations that are happening behind the scenes as well? And that's a fine balance. That has to be done very carefully in a way with all of our program work, not just a specific example of how do we balance the quiet diplomacy and the activism work, making sure that we're not putting anybody in harm's way, and that we're using the right tool and the right approach and the right methodology to be able to get the community's message across and come together to find common solution, nonviolent common solution. And this is something that we have done in our work internationally for decades. So I wanted to take advantage of your question to impress upon that matter, that this is, in order to be able to work with communities, we need to be able to do it together, and we need to be able to do it in a variety of modes and methods. So we have a couple more minutes. I want to see if there are any other questions out there. Yes.
Thank you. Elavi Ndura, Gallaudet University. This is a difficult question to ask. Because it's almost like I'm going to expose my own naivete. I used to take it for granted that people of color would almost all of them and automatically support the right of the populations that we call undocumented and all the other words, until I learned that that was not true, that quite a large number of people of color are actually argue that when they came legally, and that therefore they will not support the rights of all those children, like the one you showed on the screen, who's worried about being separated from her family and her mother not seeing her graduate from college and so forth. So how has your work began to address that very serious divide? Because if we talk about the colonization and all those things, you know, it's not working when you look at consider the rights of undocumented population, at least not in the ways in which I expected it to work.
No, it's a very interesting question. We have those encounters from time to time. We don't. So I think it's when we tell the stories, and when people tell their migration stories, I think that's will be the most powerful tool, rather than us, telling them that, no, you're wrong, and then there isn't a way for people to come legally, or most people to come legally. And so I think it's really sort of case by case. We have, our work does not focus on just sort of addressing that divide, but really recognize that divide is there and that it's actually wrong, and that people who come here, for pretty much the same reason, better future for themselves and for their children, right? And then so we try to really find a common ground, but really also be able to say that, there isn't a way for people to come legally. But in most of the time, our communities don't include those people, that would, have those claims.
So I'm looking at the time, and I actually have to get Chia-Chia to the train station. So we do have to leave, and we won't be able to take any more questions. But I did want to raise one thing. There is a way for you to interact with us. We collaborated with USIP to do this free online course, 100 Years of Nonviolent Resistance. And we encourage you to go into their Global Academy, their online courses, and take a look at all of the different sessions that are up there. And there is a way to be able to ask questions, participate, and interact directly with AFSC as well as USIP. So since there's so many practitioners as well as academics in the room, we thought it might be good to share this. This would be an ample opportunity to share this. I want to thank everybody for taking the extra time to spend with us. I want to thank our panelists for traveling all this way to come here, the great conversation, and of course the committee and everybody that invited us to come here and to be a part of this. So thank you, everybody.